Everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm John Kennedy.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And this, as many of you know, is a lectionary podcast, and the lectionary brings us in our cycle to the first Sunday of Lent, and a story that we get every year, which is Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. And as we go around and around like the old album, I have decided that this is a story that needs a new look-see. And that sometimes by seeing it all the time, we stop seeing it. And I think that for me, and perhaps many of us all, we need to unlearn what we think we know about this story in order to really begin to get the story. So here we are. We're in Matthew's Gospel. It's chapter 4, and we are verses 1 to 11. Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, 'One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve only him.'" Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. Okay, just a few things to get us started here. The first thing is, as many of you who are podcast people here may know, and which is that Rob has added questions that come from the pod. So if you're leading a Bible study, as we hear people are, these questions may be particularly helpful to you. Okay, back to the story. This is a story that works on many, many different levels. And clearly to understand Jesus, we need to understand this story. It's a very key story. It's placed in a very key place. And so just to get us started, without plunging in great depth into anything, I just want to name some of the layers on which this story works here. So the first is, this is an identity story. This is a revelation of who Jesus is, which is the very purpose of the Gospels, to say who is Jesus. And that Jesus is revealed in the previous scene in his baptism, and now he's revealed for who he is in the temptation in the wilderness. Okay, now to the second one. Jesus is the embodiment and the fulfillment of the story of the people of Israel, and that the paradigm of his life is the paradigm of the people of Israel. We see this in Matthew. The Jewish story, of course, has the correspondence of 40 years in the wilderness after they left Egypt, and now Jesus has 40 days. And like the story in Deuteronomy, we get the whole question of being brought into the wilderness to be humbled and to be tested. And the people of Israel fail. That's the basic point. Mm-hmm. And now here we have Jesus embodying that, not replacing it, but restarting the story of Israel by succeeding. Mm-hmm. Okay, the third paradigm here is right back that this isn't just for the people of Israel, this is for all humanity. And we go back to the book of Genesis, mm-hmm. and where the tempter and Adam fails there, and now we have the new Adam succeeding. The fourth paradigm is we have a spiritual warfare story. And the first battle is with darkness. I mean, Jesus is going to be opposed throughout his ministry, and now we have that. The fifth is we have a morality tale, a kind of Aesop's fable of just resist temptation and good things will come and happen to you, because in the end, of course, Jesus resists, in the end, the angels come. The sixth that I identified was we have a spiritual teaching story. And, one does not live by bread alone. And what is that alone? So we're going to get a spiritual teaching out of that. And the seventh one that I identified is we have a paradigm for the spiritual life. The Christian spiritual life is Jesus' spiritual life. And if we move through baptism, and then we also have times of wilderness. And this is a God-intended thing that's for all of us. So I'm sure there are other paradigms, but I ran out of time. Mm-hmm. And so there's the 7 paradigms to just kick us off and get us rolling.
Yeah, it's amazing. Here. I think those are super helpful, and especially for a drilling down kind of Bible study. You're making me think of this summary that somebody proposed, that the underlying temptation of the whole story is to treat God as less than God. And that in each of these scenarios that you've laid out, there's this, kind of taking matters into one's own hands because there's no trust that God will actually provide my needs. And I think that, they take many forms, and these 3 in Matthew are archetypal. Not even archetypal, they're actually big touch points of their history, the Israel's history. And this story is sort of a interpretation of Scripture. It's not necessarily, if it's historical, maybe, but it's also there to function as a way of Matthew interpreting the Scriptures to, clarify Jesus' sonship of God and his resolute faithfulness in all the ways that you've laid out, that where Moses, Israel, Adam, they fail. Jesus kind of retraces their steps and gets it right, Mm-hmm. So I think that's really you've given us a more granular, helpful breakdown of that overarching idea. I like that.
Yeah, a lot to run with here, and I think that might actually be all the paradigms.
And that's all, folks.
7 seems like a good number to stop with.
It's a biblical number.
Reasons, yes. But in any case, so I guess one thing is, I've thought about the historicity of these stories. We have 3 versions of them. Actually, we really have 2 versions of them, because Matthew and Luke are telling the same story. They switch the order of the second 2 temptations, but otherwise they're really the same story. So we have, and Mark basically tells us that this happened and doesn't give us any details. Actually, maybe we only have one version of the story. But in any case, I've wondered about its historicity as well, because Jesus didn't write anything down.
Yeah.
Nobody else was there. So did Jesus tell this story? It doesn't really strike me as a Jesus thing to do. Hey guys, let me tell you about the time I went into the wilderness for 40 days. So I don't really know. It's possible Jesus told this story. It's possible that the Holy Spirit in some way revealed the story to the evangelists. I'm happy for it to be historical. I'm happy for it to be somewhat of a midrash in a way on the Hebrew story in light of Jesus, or somewhere in between. But I do think, and this is why I'm bringing this up at all, I do think it's really important that something very much like this happened to Jesus, that he went through this period of testing and trial, that he had this wilderness period, alone, solitude, asceticism, renunciation, being apart from the world, sort of this hermetic time in which his vocation could really deepen and mature, and through which he could really become ready to be the Jesus that we know. Because this is something, to some degree, that I think anybody who wants to really plunge in to the life of the Spirit and be transformed, and even pursue holiness and saintliness, which I think is really the call of all Christians, needs to go through something like this too. And this is, to me, one of the most important truths and lessons about this passage. I was just reading in the middle of a book by Thomas Merton called Contemplative Prayer. That was actually one of the first books I got by Merton because it was short. I was like, I can approach this. And then when I opened it at age 21, I was like, I don't understand this. But obviously it's come to me more over time. And one of the things he talks about is how for the monastic, the monk, there's a common misconception about the spiritual life, and specifically the monastic life, that if you just cut out and remove yourself from the noise and the distractions and the temptations of the world, you'll find inner peace, right? And And actually, when you cut out all the noise and the distractions and temptations, it actually turns up the heat inwardly. And this is why we fly away from ourselves and away from solitude and away from silence into the noise of the world, because it keeps us from having to face this interior desert and all of the stuff and all the tangles and snarls that are within our psyche and in our soul. And that when you actually go into the wilderness, however, literal or metaphorical, you're face to face with yourself, and that's very difficult to face.
Yeah.
And that's what the monk, for one thing, has to deal with, and that's what we all have to deal with if we really want to come out the other side and be comforted by the angels. Let's say. Yeah.
Oh wow, super cool. Yeah, I mean, the historicity of this question. There's no one there, and did Jesus find that this experience was so important that he told his disciples about it? This is obviously the unanswerable question. But I like the way you guys have framed it, which is, if this happened literally as it was, great. If it didn't, great. So the lively word, the word still conveys it. And I do think that we do find, Jesus wrestling with his calling. I mean, this is all based on, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God, if you are, and so that's what I mean. This is an identity question, and it's a calling question. And I think that, and it says, he was led up to, and for those who've been to the Holy Land, the place where this is venerated, in the Judean desert, on the edge of the Judean desert, it's just above the Jordan River, where we say that on the other side of the Jordan, Jesus was baptized, and you get in Mark's story, you get this urgency, immediately the Spirit shoves him into the wilderness, and you can see him moving from the river. And in order to lead him up to the place where he is, you have to take a tram and then walk up a hill, and then there's an Orthodox outpost monastery there, and there's 2 monks who live there, and you walk along this sheaf of rock, and then you walk inward, and they have a iconostasis, and then you walk up some steps, and you go to this cave that is venerated, where Jesus spent his time, his hermetic time, as you rightly said. And so this is Jesus's wilderness experience. And I'm very glad we're starting like somewhere in there, but we're also leaning in on the wilderness experience. So the idea that we all need to have a wilderness experience. This isn't from glory to glory. So Jesus goes from "you are my son" to the testing "if you are the son," and that we get these experiences oftentimes not by our own choosing. As you mentioned, people in recovery. Someone who's dear to my heart is in recovery now, and in the early days, this person said to me, I'm feeling really raw right now. When you take away all that I've been using to cover over the true pain that I experience, and then you take that away, I'm just trying to survive moment by moment here. And so I think there's a wilderness moment. I think, as you know, you guys care for people in our congregation who are very sick and find themselves sort of bound in bed, or by, that their aloneness. People who say that are told they have cancer and they feel alone in that. These wilderness experiences come to us, and also that in my own experience, one of the greatest wilderness experiences of my life was my going on a pilgrimage by myself and leaving behind everything that supported me. And I felt driven by the Spirit in there too. So I do think these wilderness experiences, this solitude with God, the solitude of God and the solitude of humanity coming together to create this emptiness, this space. That's why there's Christ in the desert monastery, right? There's a spaciousness here that we need to put down and then pick up. And that's what ultimately these so-called testing is about, is I'm not going to be that, I'm going to be this. This kind of choosing that comes from clarifying in the test. I mean, Abraham is tested with Isaac, and then, there's the clarifying moment and that's what this is.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great story of the Native American chief telling a story to some children and saying, I don't know if this story happened this way, but I know this story is true. So I think that's the way a lot of the stories in the Gospels are. But for Jesus, there's no doubt that he did experience testing and trial and temptation and everything. So Maybe it's just the literary device to condense it into this form, but we know he went into the wilderness and he took disciples with them sometimes and sometimes didn't. And what I like about the Matthew version is of the temptation story is that, Luke has this idea that Jesus, was in the wilderness where he was being tempted by the devil. But in Matthew, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted,
right?
Or to be tested. And I think that Matthew's one of the purposes in Matthew is to do what we've already said, which is to kind of reinterpret the Jewish scriptures to them through Jesus, and that he's put in this position to face the same temptations or tests that Israel faced in the wilderness or that Abraham faced. And they fail at each test back then, and with Jesus, he's just so resolute and he's so clear about how to respond in the face of hunger. That when the Israelites are given manna in the wilderness, they grumble even about the food. Like, God doesn't say, well, just go hungry then. He says, well, I'll give you food, and not only food, daily food, good food, and then they complain about it because they get sick of it or whatever. And so that's like revealing their utter faithlessness, and for Jesus, he won't even try to take that into his own hands. And, putting God to the test to prove God's ability to help or willingness to help when things are messy. Moses is always kind of giving in to the people's demands, and I don't know. It's just each one, I think, does really set up the story that they're used to and that they've come out of, and showing this new way to be responsive. And Jesus is the stand-in for like the whole nation, and kind of showing them this gateway into a new relationship with God, where God, like in Corinthians, Paul writes, God's grace is sufficient for me and he will supply all my needs. I think that's where the story wants to lead the reader,
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, one of the things we talked about on a pod or two ago, Jesus is the new Adam, the new human being, the human being, the Son of Man. And I was talking about the mystical experience, Jesus sharing his divine communion with us. And here I think we really do get back to the book of Genesis. Jesus showing us how to be. This is like if you went all the way back to the fall.
Yeah.
What if it had turned out this way? Like, it was almost like God's real idea was to be like Jesus, not to be like Adam.
And to not go to the wilderness. Like Adam and Eve are tested in the garden, and then when they fail, they're driven to the wilderness.
Yeah.
To find their own way or whatever.
Yeah. To me, that's one of the most interesting details when you read this passage with these Hebrew scriptural echoes in view. The story starts in paradise. Humanity begins in paradise, this garden where all needs are provided, where there's comfort, where there's no violence at all, not even the killing of animals for food. According to the biblical narrative, humans only became carnivores after the flood. It's like this concession to how much we suck on some basic level. It's like, all right, I set the bar too high, God is saying. So now you can eat animals because, I know you love bacon, that sort of thing. But the original state, biblically, is that we were vegetarians or even vegans. Which I really find fascinating. So anyway, it's this beautiful, peaceful, safe place, and then they are expelled through their succumbing to temptation, the serpent's temptation. I think again, read with the Christian story at least in mind, the serpent I think is the same tempter that Jesus is facing here, and then, when Jesus is recapitulating the story, getting the whole sort of human project back on track in a sense, he faces his temptations in the wilderness. It's very interesting to me. So much to say, but one thing, just with not only the Hebrew scriptures in view here, but also contemporary life and the things that distract us. Just an aside to something that I think is really important about this story, but I just want to thread back into this contemporary application that I'm about to make, is that what the devil tempts Jesus to do here is not to become a bad person, but just to deviate a little, what would seem like just a little bit from his calling, but just enough to take him off course in such a way that he wouldn't be the Son of God that he was called and created to be. Humanly, right? I didn't just create heresy for our theological experts, right? I'm not making an Arian move, but humanly, Jesus is called and created to be the Son of God. Obviously, in another sense, he already is, but and uncreated is sort of the point there to anybody who's tracking on that. But so that's so relevant for what I think about with modern life in view, because like we have our phones, right? And they have whatever the various platforms and algorithms and billionaires pulling the strings, ultimately the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Sam Altmans. They have their hooks in us, their tentacles attached to us because they are extracting our time and attention. This is how they make their money, and it's terrible. And it's reprehensible. These businesses don't have to function this way, but they choose to because that is what is most profitable, and there's no moral justification for it. But anyway, the things that they suck us in with don't seem all that bad. Oh, a cat video. Oh, here's some stand-up thing. Oh, this is funny. Oh, yeah, this is telling me about some political thing that I care about. It's like all the stuff, it's fine. Some of it's actually not, but at best, it's like, it's okay. But the problem with all that stuff is that it scatters us and it takes us maybe just a little bit off course, but enough for it to really matter. And that's what it makes me think of in terms of the contemporary situation.
Oh, wow. Really interesting. I didn't have any idea that's where you were going to go with that. I was head nodding as you moved into contemporary application.
Yeah.
I think what you said is very interesting and petrifyingly true.
Yeah.
I even watch my own self in my meditation time, moving my phone farther and farther away from me because the phone is the one thing that can break my I'm a little uncomfortable here. I'm kind of antsy, and if I can just if I put the phone in the other room, I might sit longer rather than putting it right on my little table on the right. Yeah. But also, two other things on sort of application to contemporary life and maybe all life. One is, I think that for clergy, this is a very important story because the temptation in your vocation to just barely turn it toward self-satisfaction or to the idea that you want everybody to like your podcast, like you want everyone to
please like and subscribe.
Please like and subscribe. Please, you want people to like our sermons. We want our congregation to grow. We want to be the man or the woman or the person, and that this sort of thinking is soul destroying and vocation destroying, church destroying. And so and these temptations are very real. Anybody who's is a clergy person contends with this. That it can distort. I think the second thing that contemporary, particularly applicable to a contemporary life, is one does not live by bread alone. He doesn't say, and I know the quotation goes back into the Hebrew scriptures and back to Deuteronomy 8. But it doesn't say that one doesn't live by bread, right? Like, actually, one does live by bread, right? We need food to eat, and we need bread. We need some kind of currency to trade in order to live. But it's the alone part that I think is particularly applicable to what our world today, where in a world where to have a faith life is not a given, and that we can have people who are very full and are starving to death. That to be a human being involves the life of the Spirit, and that we have so many that are full but are starving to death. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at here in the Word, to live on the Word. And since, we now have spent years plunged into the scriptural Word here, talking with each other every week, and that we, the three of us, would attest to the power of of the Word to feed our souls and to keep us from starving to death, having nothing to do with food. And that the pointing toward the lively Word, not just in Scriptures, but the lively Word of God, which is eternal. That's the feeding of the soul, which is the primary purpose of religion, which is, to bring us in communion with the divine being and then to feed the souls for which we were created for. And so I think that's also very applicable to life today.
Yeah, very much. There's I think these temptations, as you said at the beginning, this story could use another look-see, because I think the temptations do sound arcane and, biblical. They don't sound, or just for Jesus, particular to his superhuman status and stuff. And who's going to jump off a cliff? Who's tempted to do that? I'm going to prove that God loves me by jumping off this cliff. We're certainly struggling with the same mechanisms of distraction and also where we think our security, help, nourishment comes from. And I think there's an interesting connection, I think, right in Scripture with what the first century or second century church people, well, first, I guess in Corinthians, it's even before the Gospels, but in Corinthians, there's that whole chapter in Corinthians about the meat sacrificed to idols and why it was so controversial. And it's because they, in that society, they had guilds, like whatever their business was, the tent makers, the, bankers or the weavers, whatever, they each had their little guild, big guild for business. And to gather, it would be like the Elks Club or something where they'd have to go to their meetings. And then there was always a sacrifice to the Roman god of weaving or something. Like they'd sacrifice the meat on the altar and then they would all dine together and, you'd hobnob and network. And that's how they could further their careers, So when Jesus followers were going in there and they're out writing to Paul, can we eat this meat or not, And Paul's answer is, well, are the idols real or not? Eat the meat, but don't do it if it makes your brother stumble. Who does think the idol's still like a demon and a real thing. But, there's that temptation to like, well, if I just blend in or, I can just do it this once knowing I don't believe in it. But I could get ahead. There's all kinds of versions of that in our own lives where just a little bit will be idolatrous because it's good for our image or, I need it to further my career or what have you. I think there's all sorts of, it starts before people are working. Like in high school, you want to just fit in so you'll not call out the bully or, you'll go along with the gossip or whatever it is. There's so many temptations that have a place to live in one of these things. And I think to get away from the actual language in it and to get underneath to what the motivation for why this would be tempting is a little deeper work to do. But it's incredibly relevant. Like we're so idolatrous in our society. It's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, why does I was saying this starts in middle school, you don't have to wait to high school for this stuff to kick in, but why does this stuff happen? And John, I know you've got something brilliant to say, but I can just stick my nose in the middle of this 1 second. So, I mean, back to where the first paradigm that I laid out was Jesus's identity. You are the Son of God. And then the question of doubt, the question of trust, which you started off talking about here. Can you trust that? Can you trust your identity? And so each of us has an identity. I have an identity as Peter, and you have, and John and Elizabeth, and each of our identities. And so I think part of what we're talking about here is claiming yourself, Jesus claiming his Son of Godness, our claiming our child of Godness, our particularity. And when we don't, we get involved with all these temptations. We start to make these choices. We we start to feed ourselves with all of these things, these distractions you're talking about, John. And that's when it don't go so well. When we cannot live grounded in the love, you're made in the image of God. You experience the image of God. You experience divine love, for who you are at that deep cellular level. Because when it ain't like that, that's the fall. Things get distorted and.
I think what I want to talk about actually is idolatry, because I have more to say about that. I'm going to go back to what Elizabeth was talking about. But this temptation in particular of, if you worship me, if you bow down before me, all the kingdoms of the world will be yours. I mean, this is like you were saying with regard to the jumping off a cliff one, like who's tempted to do that? I mean, you know, there was like a satanic panic back in the 1980s or so that was overblown and not real for the most part. We don't really encounter a lot of Satan worshipers. I mean, the Church of Satan, as it is not really Satan worship. It's more trolling the religious right. Or
religious people in general.
Perhaps, but I would say more the religious right. So we don't really encounter a lot of this sort of thing, right, in that literal form. But the idolatry thing, the bowing down before quote-unquote other gods, is something that we're dealing with all the time. As Bob Dylan said, right, you got to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. None of us, it seems, really live a life with ourselves as the ultimate reference point. Even if we do, even if our lives are all about ourselves and it's all about our ego and its imagined fulfillment, bolstering it, acquiring more fame, status, wealth, power, whatever it is, approval, those things are our gods. We're bowing down at the altar of wealth or power, and so on. And if we're doing these things, it means that we don't trust in God. You know, a lot of people, especially as our societies become so secular, don't even make the pretense of having faith or ultimate trust or belief in God. You know, they subscribe to a more, in a sense, Nietzschean view of the universe where, you know, God is dead, or God never existed, and all these stories about love and, you know, hope for eternal life and peace on earth. They're just fictions. They're just consolations, coping mechanisms for the bleak reality of our world, that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and you just got to take what you can get for yourself. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must, and so on. Some people don't even make the pretense of virtue and so on. They just grab what they want. But a lot of people, you know, think like, oh, I do believe in God, but, and we can't really reach the people I just described, except in very special cases. But the people that are reachable, and that I relate to, and I find myself in this position so often, is, you know, I do believe in God, and I want to trust in God. I do trust in God sometimes, but not enough to be completely free from bowing down before these other gods that I was talking about. You know, I do trust in God, but, you know, I can't help but desire the comforts that are, you know, flash before me on my iPhone, you know, about vacations or consumer goods, products, experiences, whatever it is. I don't trust in God quite enough to not be drawn in by that sort of thing. And so this is where these temptations really become alive for us today. And since I just mentioned the iPhones again, there was something I wanted to say earlier about the connection to the Genesis fall story, the temptation story in Genesis. The knowledge of good and evil, right? It's the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve are told not to eat, and what they're tempted to eat. And this is where the whole story goes haywire. And I don't know Hebrew, and I haven't looked into this in a while, so I'm a little sketchy on the details. But I read somewhere once that the Hebrew language that's used around the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is related to technics and technology, and that this bears fruit, if you'll allow that, a few chapters later with the Tower of Babel story, which is all about the human pursuit of greatness by means of technology, this technological achievement of a very tall tower that'll reach up into the heavens so humans can reach divinity. And obviously technology is in some way the great idol and the great false god of our time. I mean, people talk about AI in theological, divine terms, you know, that it is becoming or has become divine, that God didn't exist, but we've created it. And so many people nowadays, you know, don't make decisions without consulting ChatGPT as their God. So this is super, super relevant for us today.
Yeah, it's really, it's a big topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the pursuit of wealth as a temptation and the pursuit of beauty or status and stuff like that, I always love how you talk about money as energy, and that, you know, and I think you could put in there any type of commodity that is going to further somebody or some cause or whatever. Like this is a stretch, but I'm thinking about Eric Liddell, the runner in Chariots of Fire, who's, you know, God made me fast and I have to run fast. And, you know, it wasn't an end in itself so much. He was just taking it to its limit, you know, and I think some people are gifted at turning products into gold, you know, or they have a great idea that you can monetize to a huge extent. And it can help the world or it can hurt the world. But it's the energy in it that I think is the temptation. Like, will I turn this to, will I disregard any kind of fallout or consequences that my success will have, you know, and could I rein it in order to not cause such suffering somewhere or whatever? I mean, the choices we make have to be conscious, and I think temptations can take any kind of form. You know, there's a story of a monk who joins a monastery and he's so competitive that he's going to be the very best silence sitter and, you know, the most ascetic sufferer. And then his abbot says, you know, I need you to eat this many cookies every day and you're going to do nothing. I want you to laze around. And that was his challenge, was to like not be the best monk ever. And I feel like, you know, the temptation is just where the energy is all towards our own self. And, so, you know, people who are wealthy and successful, I don't think that it's a reflection that you didn't say this, but I think people might hear that idea that it's bad, you know, bad to pursue wealth, bad to, you know, have power. And I don't think that's what's up at stake here. I think it's just the kind of energy you're going to extract from that power and wealth, and where you're going to put the energy, you know?
Yeah. Thank you. Really interesting, and I feel like we could have several more podcasts. On the way out, and I feel like we're long here, but can I just say a word about where I started, which was I think Peter does well to rethink this thing, and I just would like to say a brief word about the devil. Which is the devil, Satan. I mean, in the scriptures, Satan is not a name; it's a title. The tempter, and scriptural understandings of that in our baptismal rite, we have that. Oh, isn't that amazing that I just happen to have a Book of Common Prayer here?
It's open to the right
That's
page.
incredible. Open to the right page, right? Do you renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces of wickedness that rebel against God? And do you renounce the evil powers of this world which corrupt and destroy the creatures of God? And do you renounce all sinful desires that draw you from the love of God? And so, I mean, some of these paradigms here are built into the way we understand the whole of the divine economy and the human economy, and that for modern people and postmodern people, the whole question of Satan and devil can seem like a construct that is a game ender, and so therefore, by not believing, don't get involved. And I think that we do really well to unlearn that which we have culturally learned. I mean, in the scriptures, for instance, in the scriptures, there's, you know, the way the devil has been portrayed in art through time. That's not in the scriptures, and how much of this comes from, you know, Milton and Paradise Lost and mythology. You know, we get the devil as a kind of gargoyle-like reptilian figure, and then, you know, somewhere I think, you know, like in the Renaissance, it starts to shift over, and the devil gets a new look, and starts to appear as a monk. And now, you know, how the so-called devil gets depicted. I think we do ourselves an incredible disservice in depicting. And that we do ourselves a great service in saying that can we assent to the idea that there is a force in the world that comes with no explanation. We don't know where it comes from. We don't know why it exists. This is the so-called problem of evil. But that there's something beyond, you know, human stupidity and human distortion that leads to some really, really, really bad stuff in the world, which we have so many examples of. It would take a whole podcast to go through all all the wreckage of the human being that's going on in our world now, but that to say that there is this force and to sort of dehumanize the force, that there is a force that's no bueno, and that's what Jesus is, first thing is to take on. Is to be taken on and taken on that force. And again, so not, back to what we've been talking about throughout this whole 40 days of this podcast, how to make this biblical typology not a stumbling block to the truths that are underneath it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah. Super important. I mean, I mentioned this in the podcast on basically the same story I recorded with Rob last year, which I went back and listened to, and I really enjoyed listening to that
conversation.
You guys just killed
it. I should have gone there.
And also my sermon on this Sunday last year, Thomas Merton, who people do not think of as spiritual warfare guy, right? He's the contemplative prayer guy. But nonetheless, he said that, the world is not this neutral arena in which we might come to know and love God or not. Which I think is how we commonly imagine it. It's just like, okay, I'm in the world, and God wants me to come to God, and I want that too, and hopefully that'll get sorted out. But the world's just sort of there. No, the world, by virtue of going to the scriptural language of Satan being, in a sense, the ruler of the world, the world is, if not inherently, is filled with a force that is opposed to our coming to God. We live in a world that in some sense is hostile to our coming to know God and coming to therefore be who we were created and called to be. And just to say the world, not obviously in the sense of the natural world, which is God's good creation, but the human world, the humanly constructed world of our culture and the way that it operates in all the ways that we've talked about and so many more. And so, I think that Jesus's ministry is preceded by this reckoning, this contending with, and this triumphing over this force is very, very, very important, because if we live without an awareness that we have an opponent, right? I think that's what Satan means in Hebrew. Then we're very vulnerable to, again, not being turned into bad people, but just being nudged just enough off course that we can say, I'm a good person. People think I'm a good person. Life is okay, but who knows what we're missing out on, so really important, I think, and not to get therefore hung up on the questions of, horns and hellfire and all this stuff, but to accept this basic fact that just seems evidently true, that we're confronted with some realities in this world where the only sane, compassionate response is like, that is just evil, that is just wrong, right? That there is this force in the world. And it often appears to us not as evil and not as repugnant, but as very seductive and very appealing.
Yeah, I know we have to end it, but
go. No, I want please. For sure.
I feel like it's dicey to separate too much, a force of evil from humanity's behavior and humanity's like mechanisms of violence. I feel like if we trace it into I think that evil is a force, but it's a force that we participate in, and so by participating, that's the force, is by participating in ways that exclude, hate, revile, categorize, divide, separate. There's also present, intrinsic into all of us, and we're part of the creation, the overwhelming presence of the divine and God and love and wanting to return us to our right mind, And so, I feel like if we use too much language of it's out there and we're born into this world that's got a pre-existing force and we don't know where it comes from or where it's going, it sounds like we're not the ones responsible for it, And I feel like the things that people say in the Bible that, God was violent then in the Old Testament and he's created good and evil so we could choose. I just don't see it that way anymore. I just feel like we have our blinders on, and Jesus is here to kind of like pull us out of this dark place of behaving towards one another. But anyway, I guess we're all probably landing on the very same place, but it's a big topic. And
It is.
yeah, I think whatever it is, we shouldn't pretend that, I think there was a time it wasn't going to be in the prayer book. And it was Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, who like slammed her fist on the table with all the bishops and said, in the 1970s, when they wanted rainbows and light everywhere, she was like, bishops may not believe in Satan, but anthropologists do.
Right on.
And she was like, we're keeping it in because it's real.
It's like an Evelyn Underhill moment telling the bishops, remember the interesting thing about religion is
God.
The clergy often forget what's what here. But
So the language, feels disconnected from us, but we have to remember that it is the little stuff. I mean, that's the evil, or things that we think we can be separate from God and handle it ourselves, or decide who's in and who's out and stuff like that, and be the judges.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the crux of the temptation story, is like playing God, taking matters into your own hands, thinking you know better. Yeah. God's not there, and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that one interesting question, sort of clarifying question that I don't think we all have to answer, but like if humanity went away, would evil exist? As some sort of cosmic entity. I think that's, but to get to what actually plays out in our lives, I think evil is manifest in human behavior. I mean, I'm very open to some sort of paranormal sort of exorcism sort of things, because there are some very compelling reports of these things, but the primary expression by far is human behavior, and whether it's violence, as you were talking about, Elizabeth, or just self-seeking, that's where it plays out, most definitely. So it's no way to dodge any responsibility. Yeah.
Okay, everybody. Yeah, thank you. And Rob's not even behind the camera anymore. He went down to the bathroom, and he's going to come back up eventually.
Break.
I couldn't help it. We are a little bit longer than usual, but this is a paradigmatic story that it brings so many threads. So back to my 7 paradigms to get us started. There's so much in here, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff we left on the cutting room floor, believe it or not, but this is our whack at it for today. Yeah. And I mean, the big issues of the Bible are in this story. In this 11 verses are packed chock full. And so, grateful to each of you, and grateful to Rob, and grateful to all of you who have hung in with us for so long here. And just to say again, where I started the podcast, Rob has added questions that might fall out of the conversation we were having to help groups move forward through the morass of blah, blah, blah. So we are in Lent now, and we pray that you have a blessed Lent, and say again that we really do read when you respond in the below, or send us emails or something like that. We're always most fascinated by the midrash that continues in all of you. So God bless you, peace be with you, and talk to you about the second Sunday of Lent coming soon. Take care. Bye-bye.